Picture this: a packed congressional hearing room, cameras rolling, and a pharmaceutical executive who thinks he's about to school a congresswoman about how the real world works. What happens next will completely destroy his political future in just 6 devastating minutes. Tim Ramaswamy leans into his microphone with that signature smirk that had carried him from big pharma boardrooms to presidential campaign stages. He's facing Representative Jasmine Crockett across the witness table, and he's feeling confident. Too confident. "Congresswoman Crockett," he says, his voice dripping with condescension, "your limited experience in the private sector makes your questioning about corporate responsibility rather ironic. Some of us have actually built businesses that created thousands of jobs, while others have merely theorized from government positions." The hearing room goes dead silent. Committee members shift uncomfortably. Cameras capture Crockett's face, which remains remarkably composed despite this unexpected personal attack. But what Ramaswamy doesn't know is that he just made the biggest mistake of his career, because the Yale-educated attorney sitting across from him has prepared meticulously for this moment, and she is about to deliver a response so thoroughly researched and devastatingly precise that political analysts will later mark it as the exact moment his promising political trajectory permanently derailed. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible political moments that reveal the truth behind today's most consequential confrontations. The House Oversight Committee had convened to examine pharmaceutical pricing practices, and every seat was filled with journalists, industry representatives, and healthcare advocates. At 38, Ramaswamy sat confidently at the witness table, his posture reflecting the assurance of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. His recent presidential campaign had surprised many with its initial traction, and even though it ultimately fell short, he'd built a devoted following as the articulate outsider who understood how to fix government through private sector principles. His communications team sat behind him, tablets ready to amplify favorable exchanges across social media. One aide continuously monitored reactions, occasionally sliding notes between questions. To them, this was just another opportunity to showcase their boss's philosophy about government overreach and business innovation. But across the room sat someone they completely underestimated: Representative Jasmine Crockett. The second-term Democrat from Texas had quickly established herself as one of the most effective questioners on the Oversight Committee. At 43, she brought credentials that made Ramaswamy's upcoming attack particularly foolish. A Yale law graduate whose career included both civil rights litigation and complex corporate cases involving major financial institutions. Since joining the committee, she developed a reputation for methodical questioning that often revealed critical details other members missed. Unlike colleagues who use questioning time for speeches aimed at generating social media clips, Crockett built careful, fact-based arguments that were nearly impossible to dismiss. She approaches hearings like depositions, her former law partner had explained. She establishes key facts first, then builds toward conclusions rather than starting with accusations. It's devastatingly effective because witnesses often don't see where she's leading until it's too late. And that's exactly what she was about to do to Tim Ramaswamy. When Chairman Johnson announced, "The chair now recognizes a gentlewoman from Texas for 5 minutes of questioning," neither participant could have anticipated how decisively this exchange would reshape public perception of both their capabilities. Crockett started with surgical precision. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ramaswamy, I'd like to focus specifically on Roivant Sciences' pricing strategy for Levothyron between 2018 and 2022. This wasn't the broad philosophical debate that had dominated the hearing. By naming a specific medication and time frame, Crockett signaled she'd done detailed homework on Ramaswamy's actual business operations. "I'm happy to discuss our general approach to pricing, Congresswoman," Ramaswamy replied, still confident. "I appreciate that, but I'm interested in this specific medication because it represents an interesting case study. Levothyron was developed primarily with NIH grant funding through a public-private partnership program." "Correct. The initial molecule was identified through that program, yes, though significant private investment followed." Crockett nodded, continuing to build her factual foundation. According to SEC filings, Roivant acquired the rights to Levothyron in 2017 for approximately $3.2 million. By 2019, your company had increased its price by 211% over what the previous manufacturer had charged. What specific additional research or manufacturing improvements justify that increase? Several committee members leaned forward. This wasn't generalized industry criticism. Crockett was pursuing a specific evidentiary trail with documented figures. Ramaswamy responded with what seemed like a practiced explanation about market dynamics and the need to fund future innovation. But Crockett wasn't accepting general answers. I'm referring to the period before those formulation improvements, which according to your company's own FDA filings weren't implemented until late 2020. The price increase I referenced occurred in March 2019, when the product being sold was identical to what the previous manufacturer had offered. She held up a document. This internal company email obtained by the committee specifically states, and I quote, "Acquisition represents excellent opportunity for immediate revenue enhancement through strategic pricing recalibration without additional R&D investment in near term." Would you agree that contradicts your explanation about formulation improvements justifying the price increase? For the first time, Ramaswamy's typical fluency faltered. His tone became slightly defensive as he dismissed the email as not reflecting company policy or his personal philosophy. But Crockett wasn't finished. She had more ammunition. Let's move to patient assistance programs, which you mentioned earlier as evidence of corporate responsibility. According to filings with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, while Roivant publicly promoted its generous patient assistance program for Levitron, actual expenditures on that program decreased by 33% during the same period that the drug's price increased by over 200%. Can you explain that discrepancy? The second precisely documented contradiction created palpable tension in the hearing room. Ramaswamy's expression tightened as he recognized that Crockett had come armed with unusually specific evidence rather than general industry criticisms. And that's when he made his fatal mistake. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice carrying that dismissive confidence, "cherry-picking statistics without understanding the broader business context is exactly the problem with government oversight of complex industries." Crockett remained completely composed, continuing her methodical presentation of evidence with a graph displayed on the committee room screens. The visual representation showed the disconnect between pricing and actual costs, which appeared to frustrate Ramaswamy further. It was then that he decided to shift from defending his business practices to attacking her credentials. "Congresswoman Crockett, with all due respect, your limited experience in the private sector makes your questioning about corporate responsibility rather ironic. Some of us have actually built businesses that created thousands of jobs, while others have merely theorized from government positions." The personal nature of this attack created immediate tension, but Ramaswamy pressed his perceived advantage. "Perhaps before questioning how the private sector operates, you might consider gaining some actual experience in it." This dismissal of Crockett's expertise was a significant tactical error. By pivoting to personal criticism rather than addressing the documented evidence, he'd inadvertently opened the door for her to respond not just on pharmaceutical pricing, but on their respective qualifications. As Crockett calmly opened a folder on her desk, those familiar with her background recognized that Ramaswamy had just made a critical misjudgment about the woman he was facing. The chamber remained absolutely silent as Crockett adjusted her microphone with the practiced precision of someone who understood that in truly consequential exchanges, control of tempo was as important as content. "Thank you for raising the question of experience, Mr. Ramaswamy," she began, her voice carrying calm authority. "I think it's important for the committee and the public to understand the background and expertise each of us brings to this discussion. Instead of defensiveness or partisan counterattack, Crockett appeared perfectly comfortable addressing the comparison. Before serving in Congress, I spent 15 years practicing law, including representing corporate clients in complex regulatory compliance cases. My work included advising pharmaceutical companies on pricing strategies that would maintain profitability while complying with federal regulations." She turned a page, her movements unhurried and deliberate. "Specifically, I serve as counsel in Northwest Pharmaceuticals v. HHS, where I help my client navigate price transparency requirements while protecting legitimate intellectual property. That case established precedent that the industry still operates under today. This revelation of direct, relevant experience completely contradicted Ramaswamy's dismissive characterization. But Crockett wasn't finished. I also represented healthcare providers and patient advocacy organizations in negotiations with pharmaceutical manufacturers, giving me perspective from multiple sides of these complex issues. This experience included direct involvement in pricing discussions for medications similar to Levitron. She looked directly at Ramaswamy. So while I appreciate your concern about my background, I want to assure you that my questions aren't theoretical. They're informed by direct experience with how pharmaceutical pricing actually works, both legally and practically. But then came the truly devastating component of her response. While preparing for this hearing, I reviewed your company's compliance history with the Office of Inspector General at HHS. Their investigation found that under your leadership, Roivant Science failed to disclose required data to the FDA regarding adverse reactions to Levitron in 3 consecutive quarterly reports. She displayed an official letter on the screen. This official warning letter from 2021 details how this reporting failure coincided with your company's public stock offering, when negative safety data might have affected investor confidence. This revelation connected Ramaswamy's business practices directly to public safety concerns. The hearing room remained silent as the implications registered. The investigation concluded that this reporting failure potentially endangered patients while protecting company valuation. It resulted in a significant financial penalty and mandatory compliance oversight. Crockett looked directly at Ramaswamy, her expression reflecting not triumph but genuine concern. So when we discuss experience, Mr. Ramaswamy, I believe what matters isn't simply whether someone has worked in the private sector, but how they've conducted themselves when balancing profit motives against public health responsibilities. This reframing from a credential comparison to an ethical assessment completely reversed the dynamic Ramaswamy had attempted to establish. My questions today aren't about attacking business or innovation, she concluded. They're about ensuring that companies receiving public research funding, selling products that people's lives depend on, and benefiting from government-granted patents fulfill their obligations to the American people. I believe that's something we should all be able to agree on regardless of our career backgrounds. As her time expired, the impact was palpable throughout the chamber. What had begun as Ramaswamy's attempt to dismiss her expertise had transformed into a moment that called into question the very foundation of his business and political identity. For perhaps the first time in his public career, Tim Ramaswamy appeared momentarily at a loss for words. By the time the hearing concluded 3 hours later, video clips of the exchange were already circulating widely across news and social media platforms. What made it so compelling wasn't theatrics or personal attacks, but the stark contrast between Ramaswamy's dismissive characterization and Crockett's methodical presentation of documented evidence. Political analysts immediately recognized the significance for Ramaswamy's carefully constructed public image. His entire political identity is built around being a successful businessman who understands how to balance innovation with responsibility, observed veteran strategist Michael Steele. This exchange directly challenged that narrative with specific evidence rather than partisan attacks. The response from Ramaswamy's team evolved rapidly as they realized the seriousness of the damage. An initial statement dismissing the exchange as political theater was quickly replaced by a more substantive response acknowledging the FDA warning letter, but characterizing it as standard regulatory correspondence. This shifting response only heightened media interest. By evening, business publications that had previously featured favorable profiles were publishing investigative pieces examining Roivant's compliance history and pricing strategies. Most tellingly, 3 scheduled appearances on financial news programs were quietly postponed. A prominent conservative PAC that had been considering him for leadership issued a statement about evaluating various candidates. His name disappeared from short lists of potential cabinet nominees circulating among Republican strategists. The problem isn't just the specific revelations about his company, explained Republican media consultant Sarah Jenkins. It's that the exchange fundamentally undermined his political persona. His appeal was built on being a successful businessman who could speak hard truths. When his business record itself became questionable, it damaged the foundation of his political identity. 3 years later, the exchange continues to resonate through both corporate governance and political discourse. It catalyzed the Pharmaceutical Accountability and Transparency Act, which passed with unusual bipartisan support. Business schools now teach the Ramaswamy effect as a case study in reputation risk in the digital age. For Ramaswamy personally, rehabilitation proved challenging. His media appearances increasingly focused on cultural commentary rather than business leadership or government service. The defining narrative had shifted permanently. What had once been his greatest political asset, his business background, had become a vulnerability requiring explanation rather than a credential conferring authority. The exchange demonstrated a fundamental truth about both corporate leadership and political ambition. In an age of documented records and digital archives, the gap between public persona and actual practice has narrowed considerably. What matters isn't simply impressive credentials or confident assertions, but whether one's actions align with stated principles. Most significantly, it influenced how voters evaluate claims of business experience in political candidates. Focus groups found increased skepticism toward generic assertions about private sector success without ethical dimensions. Voters now distinguish between having business experience and demonstrating ethical business leadership. As political scientist Francis Fukuyama observed, the Crockett-Ramaswamy exchange marked a significant moment in how democratic systems evaluate expertise. It demonstrated that in healthy governance, credentials must be accompanied by evidence of ethical decision-making and consistency between public positions and private actions. 3 years after those fateful 6 minutes, the lesson remains clear. Sustainable leadership depends not on confident assertions or impressive titles, but on demonstrable alignment between stated principles and actual practices. In those 6 minutes, Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend her qualifications. She redefined what qualifications actually matter in public service. And Tim Ramaswamy? He learned the hard way that in the age of transparency, your actual record speaks louder than your political persona ever could. If you found this deep dive into political accountability fascinating, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of political moments that changed everything. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, because understanding how our democratic institutions really work has never been more important.